Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, wizards and muggles, all welcome to another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's get to your first question. Bunch of great questions this week. Brick Hardslab. Turok used to have a few educational pages in each issue. When I was a kid, I felt like I was learning something interesting. Kind of like when I read the books about Civil War firearms as a kid. You're learning, but it's cool. Do you ever get the urge or editorial direction to add educational material to the entertainment? Say, for example, something about the Ice Age or Snowball Earth in Winterworld. Or maybe it doesn't matter anymore how many kids read comics anyway. Yeah, Dell Comics, Gold Key Comics, they would have these little fun fact pages they would run. And, if you read Turok, you learned all about dinosaurs. And if you were like me as a kid, you couldn't learn enough about dinosaurs. In Tarzan books, they'd have things about wild animals. And in the Westerns, you could learn all kinds of stuff like, how to brand cattle. Useful for a 10-year-old living in the Philadelphia suburbs. So anyway, and DC used to include. I don't remember Marvel ever doing that, but DC used to have some educational stuff. Kind of did you know kind of things, or fascinating facts about science. I don't remember Marvel ever doing that kind of public service announcement or educational pages. Why do I keep doing that? I remember in I think the second or third issue of Nexus, Mike Barron did this really cool educational page about black holes because the Nexus story had a lot of stuff about black holes. And I remember it had Mike with a little word balloon where he says, "There's a lot of loose talk about black holes. I'm here to straighten you out." And I thought that was pretty cool. That was a neat thing to include. And it was kind of a throwback to the kind of pages you were talking about used to be in comics. I have done, edutainment comics. You mentioned Civil War Firearms. There are two volumes called Civil War Adventure by me and Gary Quapis and a bunch of other terrific artists working on it. And these were both factual retellings about battles, lots of information pages about firearms and things like that, and particularly gross ones that Gary did about surgery practice, battlefield surgery practices. Uh, Gary helpfully shows the kids how to amputate a limb. But these are still available from Dover Press. You can find them on Amazon. They were originally self-published by Gary and I until we got tired of losing money. We sold the publication rights to Dover. But they're available, 150 pages plus in black and white. Terrific artwork, fun stories. Well, not fun, it's the Civil War, but interesting and educational along the lines of what you were talking about. And you know, and I wrote, the Bad Times books, my time travel series. Every once in a while, I would be compelled in one of these to add a historical notes essay at the end because I was representing some obscure periods in history. And some of the stuff I was representing, readers may have gone, "That never happened. This guy's nuts. He's got to be making this stuff up. Nothing that crazy could ever have really happened." But it did. And I really wanted to, um, put forth my historical bona fides, the results of my research, and the sources of my research to prove that, yeah, this nutty, crazy, insane, psychotic stuff that happened in the past actually did happen, even though you've never heard about it. So, so I am compelled sometimes to, throw some knowledge at at my readers, or at least share my enthusiasm over the subject matter. Joshua Ignatowski, your run on Guy Gardner ended on quite the bang with the revelation of the character Militia's true identity. Had you continued working on the comic run, how do you think you might have further explained Militia's origins and motives and explored what his dynamic with Guy was like now, all of their cards are on the table? Um, Yeah, I mean, for those of you who don't know, I can't assume that everybody watching this is a diehard Chuck Dixon fan and memorized my entire bibliography. I did a sort of truncated run on the Guy Gardner comic back in the day, back in the 90s. And in it, I explored the background, Guy Gardner's history, which had never really been talked about before. And I, showed him, growing up in Baltimore that kind of stuff, his teenage years and formative years. And it was a lot of fun. I was given a lot of leeway by editor Kevin Dooley to just make stuff up because Guy Gardner's history up to that point was pretty much a blank slate. So I was free to run around and just make stuff up for this character. And I don't know what happened there, but one of the characters I created was Militia, and I don't know why the Militia image disappeared on me. But so, but Militia was a big badass, you know, muscular, weapons laden character. And in my final issue, I revealed, quite a surprise about that character's origins. But I used him often. I used him in Birds of Prey as well, a few times, and he was a fun character to do. Him and his erstwhile girlfriend Honey, who never had a last name. Twin spin. Of course, Joshua gets a twin spin. Um, what got Guy Gardner into the Monkees? Yeah, I revealed that Guy Gardner was a Monkees fan. I just thought that was funny. Um, and largely it was based. I wasn't. I mean, I don't hate the Monkees. I just don't have a whole lot of adoration for them. you know, they were fine. They were fun. Um, but I was inspired by this by a number of grown-ups I met at the time, guys working in comics. Tom Lyle was one of them, who was a big Monkees fan, and it just kind of surprised me that there were adult Monkees fans. People that grew up with their music and would still listen to it, and were kind of devoted to it. I mean, they bought all their albums and went to see them live and everything else. And I'm not putting them down. I just was surprised. I just thought, okay, this is a group that you know, came and went, and nobody really remembers them and everything else. Very nice for the manufactured for that people love them. Still and still listen to them, and they're still relevant to their original fan base. But it just kind of surprised me, and so it was on my mind when I was writing Guy Gardner, and I thought, what if Guy was a Monkees fan? I mean, that's kind of unexpected. He doesn't seem like the guy that would be into them. Triple spin. Joshua is piling up the spins. How much of Mace Gardner's career in the police force do you think he spent being a crooked cop? Yeah, I introduced Mace Gardner, Guy Gardner's little brother. Up to this point, it never existed. And, when did he become a crooked cop? Boy, I don't know. I would assume if you join the police force and you're ever going to be crooked, you're going to be crooked from the very first time someone offers you some cash. That would be my guess. Uh, so day one, as soon as somebody offered him a C note to look the other way, I think Mace went for it because as revealed in the basically year one or early years continuity that I did, the 4 issues explaining Guy Gardner's background, I showed they had kind of a rough upbringing. And Guy went one way, and his brother Mace went the other. And I was kind of proud of naming him Mace. I mean, the kind of person would name their son Guy, probably name their other kid Mace. And if they had a daughter, they probably name her Candy. The guy had those kind of parents. Quadruple spin. Look at you, Josh. Just piling up the spins, heaping them. There we go. I found it interesting in your General Grievous miniseries how you showed him being racist toward the alien species he fought. Like, kudos to you for making such a threatening villain even more villainous, by the way. what inspired you to write this is an aspect of his character. Um, Again, for those of you who are not, total Chuck Dixon aficionados, my only foray into writing Star Wars comics was this 4-issue General Grievous miniseries, which Dark Horse invited me to write. I was very enthusiastic about. I was watching the Cartoon Network Clone Wars cartoon shorts, and Grievous was introduced. I thought, wow, this guy's cool. I want to know more about him. And so I got to learn more about him because I wrote this series, and the Star Wars folks, the Lucasfilms folks sent me all their information on General Grievous, including the fact that he was to be voiced by Gary Oldman in the movies, but he wasn't. And I worked on this with Rick Leonardi, an artist I always enjoyed working with, and boy, he killed it. He killed it on this series. It's just beautiful. I'm very, very proud of it. But what made me make General Grievous a racist or a speciesist or whatever you call somebody who finds other alien races icky? I just thought, like you said, it made him more villainous and more creepy. So why not? And it's something that I think it was a reaction to when I was writing Alien Legion. Um, Carl Potts made it clear in his concept for Alien Legion that all the alien races would get along, right? That they would be conditioned to get along, and not freak out when you saw a giant praying mantis walking into the room. So they sort of eliminated xenophobia, and I went along with it because it was Carl's concept. But to me, that doesn't make any sense. you know, if you have an aversion to like rats or things with tentacles, you're going to be a little uneasy if you're bunking with somebody, who looks like a giant rodent or a sentient octopus. You're going to be a little freaked out. And I thought, well, I'm going to use General Grievous as a vehicle for this. I mean, we see in Star Wars that there are some established racial or whatever kind of prejudices. If you recall, in the very first Star Wars film, C-3PO and R2-D2 are not allowed in the bar. So you just assume that there's some types of extraterrestrials not as welcome as others. And I just wanted to bring that out. And as you pointed out, it makes him more of a villain, that he's highly intolerant as well as being super creepy and weird and murderous. Nikita Kulix. Why does the character of Batman endure while most of the other characters end up in the dustbin of history? In other words, what makes the character iconic and able to stand the test of time? Um, I think it's just the fact that there's so many cool aspects to Batman. I mean, he's got it all. He's like an amalgam of everything. And it's quite understandable why he took off as a character in his initial appearance, remained popular, only increased in popularity when the TV show came along, and then exploded once again when the movies came out. And I think he endures because he's kind of a little bit of everything. Um, you know, every, it's easy to see that Batman is like an amalgam of a lot of different fictional characters and their tropes. He's a little bit Dracula. He's a little bit of the Shadow. He's a little bit Sherlock Holmes. He's a little bit the Phantom, and and he's a little bit James Bond, even though James Bond comes after Batman because he's got all those fantastic gadgets and the cool lair and everything else. And I think also the fact that he's a self-made man, that we can uh, all think I could be Batman. I could never be Superman, but I could be Batman if I was determined enough and had enough money. I could be Batman. And I think that's one of the reasons that it endures. Also, um, he had a terrific creative team at his inception with Bill Finger and Jerry Robinson. If you'll notice, I'm not including Bob Kane, who created all these amazing villains for him. And Batman's rogues gallery, much like Spider-Man, I think Spider-Man, a lot of Spider-Man's popularity is due to he had a terrific rogues gallery. Batman has a terrific rogues gallery. We know them all: Joker, Penguin, Catwoman, the Riddler, and these all came along, in the first years of his inception, and then it grows with Ra's al Ghul and Killer Croc and great characters like the ventriloquist and the Wraith, and or the Wrath, and all of that, and it just sort of it's a franchise that just sort of built and built and built on this cool basis, this cool foundation. But I mean, let's face it, at the heart of it, it's that costume. I think 95% of the reason why Batman endures is that bat symbol and that costume. It is one of the greatest, most iconic, it is the most iconic comic book superhero costume of all time. He's one of those rare characters, along with Wolverine and a few others, that you know who it is by his silhouette. Um, and I think that's the biggest reason why it endures. Now, all the other things are very important, to keep it going. You can't just go on how the guy's dressed, but I think that costume really put it over at the beginning, and then allowed the series to continue, allowed Batman to live on his fictional life, because that costume kicks ass. And any variation of it kicks ass. That's another thing about the Batman costume. Look at all the permutations it's been through, but it's still that basic look and silhouette is still there. Dale Ailing. Now that Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest is in public domain, who do we got to send money to for us to get a Chuck Dixon penned comic book adaptation of this classic book? Red Harvest, for those of you who don't know, was a novel by Dashiell Hammett. Hammett was never a prolific author due to, I believe, alcoholism and the prevarications of Lillian Hellman. But Red Harvest, along with Maltese Falcon and The Thin Man, are considered his best novels. And Red Harvest generally rises to the top even over those classics. It's a terrific story, and what I view as it was a fresh plot line at the time. Nobody had come up with this idea before. And it features a Continental op. He's a private detective who works for like a Pinkerton type agency, which Hammett used to be a Pinkerton man. And apparently, this is all based on real events that happened to Hammett when he was working for the Pinkertons in Butte, Montana. But anyway, Red Harvest has the Continental op. We never know the Continental op's real name, but he's assigned to go to this town. It's like a mining town. It's a remote mountain town, much like Butte, Montana, and it's being ruled over by two rival gangs, and it's causing all kinds of problems for everybody, including the legitimate commercial businesses trying to work in this town. These rival gangs are just causing nothing but trouble, and the op goes in and basically let them know he's for sale, and he sells his abilities to one gang and then betrays them and sells his abilities to the next. And he does this over and over again until he's brought the gang war, the looming gang war between them, to a head. And it just explodes in a tremendous amount of violence and lots of murders and bodies in the streets. And all because the op has been pushing both of these sides into a confrontation, because he realizes that he can't take these gangs down on his own. He's going to have them take each other out. Now, if this seems somewhat familiar to you, Akira Kurosawa borrowed the plot line to Red Harvest, didn't pay for it, but he borrowed the plot line to Red Harvest for his samurai classic Yojimbo, in which Toshiro Mifune comes to a town ruled by two rival gangs of gamblers and does the same thing, sells his sword to one side, then the other, to get them to fight. And basically, save the town from itself by having these clowns kill each other. Now, if you've never seen Yojimbo, you've probably seen A Fistful of Dollars, which was based on Yojimbo, which of course was based on Red Harvest. Once again, no money for Hammett, the Hammett estate, but Fistful of Dollars, the man with no name comes into a town ruled by two rival gangs, the Arojos and the Baxters. and he pits them against each other until he's the only guy. A more direct adaptation of it was the Bruce Willis movie Last Man Standing, which again is not a authorized adaptation of Red Harvest, but follows the same plot line. Bruce Willis moves into a desert town ruled by two gangs, and is the last man standing at the end of the film. So there you go. Now, you say that Red Harvest is public domain. The problem with, and I ran into this with a certain barbarian, problem with is, yes, it probably is technically public domain, and technically you could do a comic book project based on it. But even if you do, the rights holders, the original rights holders, will still try to take you to court to make you prove your case that it's really public domain. So that costs money because you got to hire lawyers to make the case to firmly establish, yes, this is public domain. You could fight it. It's going to cost you a lot more money than you're ever going to make doing a Red Harvest graphic novel. Now, some publisher out there, and they're never going to pick me, but if some publisher out there wants to go to war and prove it's public domain and do a graphic novel, God bless them. And maybe somebody will, and I hope they do a terrific job. Personally, I mean, just to tantalize you, were I to do Red Harvest as a graphic novel, I would do it as a European comic album format. And my artist wish list, the two guys that come to mind right away are Butch Guice, or this is going to seem an odd one to you, Kieran Dwyer. I haven't worked with Kieran in a long time, but I really liked working with Kieran when we did a few jobs at DC. And I think he would get this. I know Butch would, and I'm confident that Kieran would get Red Harvest because it's kind of a sleazy story. It's real slob hero, lowbrow kind of crime thriller. And the Continental Op is nothing. He's not a sophisticated guy. The guy mixes laudanum with his drinks. I mean, this is the kind of guy the Continental Op is. And I think that Butch or Kieran, and there's probably 3 dozen other artists that I'm simply not thinking of right now, but those are the two guys that just came to mind immediately that would just do a killer version. And maybe some publisher will hire one of them and some writer who hopefully knows what he's doing and make that happen. I would like to see that. I would love to write it, but that is unlikely. Chris Connolly, I heard banter at a local comic shop that you had been a police officer before writing comics, and your experience as a cop, I had heard, is what you use as a writer. I'd like to open with the same question now, 25 years after I met you at the con. Is it experience in working as a cop that contributes to your storytelling? Or how do you make your material authentic and grounded? I was never a cop. I was never a police officer. Never been in any uniform of any kind. I did work security, but we didn't wear uniform. We wore blazers, and we were armed with walkie-talkies, and that's it. Now, I know and have talked to a whole bunch of cops. I like cops. I think cops are awesome. And much like I talk to military veterans, I will talk to cops. If the guy says he's a police officer, I'm full of questions. Like, what about this? What about that? And, they're willing to talk when they find out, there's a citizen who actually gives a damn about them, cares about the law. So that and a lot of reading. I've read a lot of books. There's a series of books called Cop Talk, and a lot of the jargon in it's probably out of date by now. Maybe they've updated them. But Cop Talk is just firsthand accounts by police officers where they just let the cop talk. And he tells a story about a bust or an investigation or whatever. And he's using all language. And I relied heavily on that stuff, because you don't want to rely on movies and TV because a lot of that stuff isn't accurate. And then I found an amazing book, big, thick paperback, and it's basically a teaching manual for police officers. And what it was one after action report after another about shots fired incidents. And it was the police the police report. So you got to read all these police reports about their version of what happened at a shooting. And that was a real eye opener because I was really surprised how candid these policemen were in reporting what happened. You know, you read between the lines. There's a lot of emotional stuff going on. There's a lot of panic and chaos and craziness going on because once the bullets start flying, it's nuts. It's nuts. It's crazy. And read a lot about that. And I've been on shooting ranges with policemen. Um, at the best shooting day of my life at a police range up in rural Maine with Maine state troopers. And so, yeah, it's just, I'm an armchair cop. But I don't know who told you I was a police officer, but no, that's not true. I'm not going to steal valor. It's never anything close to being a police officer. Twin spin. Boom. Okay, this twin spin has a question about the twin spin. Chris Connolly asks, how did you pick the creature from the Black Lagoon as the image to go with the twin spin? I picked them early on at this channel. I was contacting people and asking if they wanted their twin spin personalized. Do you want your picture here or whatever? And one guy said, hey, I'd love if you used a picture of creature from Black Lagoon. He's my favorite Universal monster. And I used it, and I liked it so much, I just still use it. So it was personalized for one of you fine folks, but I liked it so much, I just kept using it. And with that, we get a triple spin. Chris hits the hat trick. Chris Connolly again. You recently took questions on building the Rippaverse. In the spirit of that question, could you talk a bit about building Bludhaven? How did you come up with Hogan's Alley as the name for the cop bar? The sign out in front of the bar was a great logo. I might have drawn that logo. I'm not sure. But in any case, yeah, Nite-Wing. I got assigned to write Nite-Wing, and the script was due in 3 weeks. The original writing team bailed. I never did find out why. All I knew was I had Scott McDaniel. I had orders to make every issue a Jackie Chan movie, and I had to create a new city. I already had a name. It was called Bludhaven with an umlaut, but they knew nothing about it. It just had to be as different from Gotham as I could make it. And so me and Scott McDaniel proceeded to create Bludhaven. And the thing about Bludhaven is it's down on its knees loser town. It's just a town that's over. And we see this all over, particularly in the last 20 years. You see a lot of cities in decline, a lot of cities that are simply on their knees and finished, from Memphis, Tennessee to Detroit, to Minneapolis. Towns that are hurting, and most recently Los Angeles. Towns that are hurting, towns that are on their knees and finished. And the thing is that Bludhaven is a town that always made the wrong choices. They were a whaling port. That's how Bludhaven was created. It was a whaling port. Of course, the whaling industry went the way of the dodo, and they decided their next big cash cow was going to be asbestos. And so Bludhaven became the asbestos capital of the world. And we all know how that would turn out for them. And the thing about Bludhaven, it became got such a bad reputation as like a real tank town that when they built highways and railroads and things like that, they just bypassed Bludhaven. Like there's not many exits for Bludhaven. Like it's a town you drive past, but nobody ever goes there. And where did I get the name Hogan's Alley? I got the name from the shooting range, the FBI shooting range. And there are a lot of police departments now that have shooting ranges like this, but the FBI was the first where they actually came up with a false front street scene where targets would pop up in windows and doorways, and they would vary the targets from bad guys, obvious bad guys, to obvious innocent civilians. And the point of it was to pass the Hogan's Alley shooting test for the FBI, you had to kill all the bad guys, but not shoot any of the civilians. So that's where I got the name for Hogan's Alley. And if you ever watch any John Wick extras where they're teaching Keanu Reeves and Halle Berry how to shoot. You'll see Hogan's Alley. So it wasn't a name I created; it was just a name I adapted. Now building the city, I needed some inspiration, and one of the inspirations was a town called Manayunk. Now Manayunk is a charming little adjunct town just outside of Philadelphia. Just outside of Philadelphia. It's very nice. It's an old blue collar town. It's been gentrified. It went through a hippie phase in the 60s and 70s, and it's a real cool place to visit. But how it inspired Bludhaven was it's older. All the buildings are old, and everything bypasses it. This canal goes past Manayunk. The Schuylkill Expressway, which leads to the Pennsylvania Turnpike, goes past Manayunk. There's only one exit. The railroad, as you can see in this picture, goes past Manayunk. No stop. So I'm sure the citizens of Manayunk are happy about that because they just kind of get left alone. I don't know what it's like now, but back when I remember visiting Manayunk, it was this funky, cool, you little town. Now, on the flip side, you've got Camden, New Jersey, which was also a inspiration for Bludhaven. And Camden is not, it's funky, but it's not pleasant. It's not charming. Camden is a town in New Jersey, just across the river, just across the Schuylkill, Delaware River, I'm sorry, from Philadelphia. And it's a mess. And like Bludhaven, it's a town where they just made one bad decision after another, and leading to the town's collapse. It was once a thriving, blue collar kind of factory worker kind of town. Nice place to go. Had a nice downtown district and everything else. Older relatives of mine remember going Christmas shopping in Camden. It was a cool place to go. The prices were good, but it's fallen on hard times. The greatest illustration of how bad Camden is I saw interviewed, and this was back in the early 80s. I saw an old Irish priest, and this guy was an old, tough Irish priest. You probably picture the guy, Spencer Tracy, hard bitten, and he talked about in the interview about how he was a really, really raging alcoholic as a priest, and he was a real mess. And basically, a cardinal gave him a choice. He says, "I'm going to give you Camden, New Jersey, as your diocese. You're going to be the pastor for that town. You're going to run that church, the one Catholic church in Camden." And I remember this guy. They said, "Well, why did you make the choice?" And he goes, "It was either Camden or hell." And that really sums up Camden. You would have a hard choice between the two. Quadruple spin. Christopher Connolly might be today's winner in the spin contest. How did you come up with Bridget Clancy? She is a fun supporting cast character, and the history of her being born Asian, growing up in Northern Ireland, and moving to Bludhaven is such an interesting blend. Well, I had to populate Bludhaven, and I had to give Nite-Wing, Dick Grayson, an entirely new supporting cast. And, you've got to make them interesting. And I thought, well, why don't I make some of them, actual ongoing subplots? Because you need subplots. Because the DC back in this period, Paul Levitz was encouraging us, and all the editors were encouraging us to do ABC plotting. It's much like the way TV soap operas are plotting. You have a story that's beginning, you have a subplot in its middle, and then you have another subplot which is coming to an end. And these are all happening simultaneously, all layered through the story. And I thought, that's okay, I can do that. That's fun. That's neat. And it worked perfectly for Nite-Wing because, like I said, I had to populate this series with ancillary characters, people that Dick Grayson met and interacted with. I had to make them interesting. I didn't want them to be the usual cliche, stereotypical kind of characters. So I came up with this idea that, he's going to move into Bludhaven. And he's not Batman. He's not going to have a mansion. He's going to rent an apartment. He's going to live as much among people as he can. He's going to be truly incognito as Dick Grayson, Unlike Bruce Wayne, Dick Grayson is going to be anonymous in this town. So he moves into an apartment building and he rents an apartment from this woman, Bridget Clancy. And for the first few issues of Nite-Wing, we don't see her. There's always a reason why we don't see her face. She's rooting around up in the attic. She's up on top of a ladder. Or she's talking to him through a door because she's just gotten out of the bath. So he never sees her, but he's fascinated by her Irish brogue. And so he begins to form a picture in his head of what she might look like. When he finally meets her, she's a attractive young Asian woman, and he's thrown. It's a very embarrassing scene for him, where he meets her and one of her girlfriends, and assumes that the redhead girlfriend is the landlady till he's corrected. Now, where I got this idea was, I told the story before. I was doing something around the house, and they were doing a report on TV about Bill Clinton's visit to Ireland, famous visit to Ireland in the 1990s, where he was trying to settle the differences between the IRA and the British government, trying to bring the orange and the green together, which he succeeded in. I got to give Bill Clinton credit. He largely succeeded in ending the troubles, as they call them. And so I'm, you're watching TV, but you're not really watching. I was doing something else, and I'm sort of listening to the TV, and I hear these two young girls being interviewed, and they're very, very excited about the fact that peace might break out in North Ireland, and they're very excited. And I'm listening to them, and I just glance over the TV to see what they look like, and they're both Asian. See these Asian girls, with these wonderful Irish brogues, and I'm like, that fantastic lilt to their voice, and I'm like, oh man, I'm going to use that someday. I'm going to use that. That's such a cool thing, because I was so surprised, and I thought I'm going to surprise readers with this someday. And shortly thereafter, I got assigned Nite-Wing, and the marbles fell into place. That's how these things work. Just put something back in the back of your head. That's a pretty cool idea. I'm going to remember that. Quintuple spin. I think we have a winner. Christopher Connolly for the 5th time. Tad, aka Nite-Wing. That's for you people just listening. That's Nite Wing. Had a slow burn development. He shows up for a few pages, later on a few again, and over time works his way into significant storylines. How did you build the pieces of his personality? Was he supposed to be a bit similar to Jean-Paul Valley? No, I never wanted you to have any illusions. See, when Jean-Paul Valley was introduced, he was like a cool, badass, driven character. And then we learned over time that he was psychotic and nuts. And a lot of the things we liked about him before were actually unpleasant. Tad Ryerstad was never meant to be loved. We were supposed to see him as sort of a buffoon and a goofball. And I knew I wanted this character. I knew I wanted there to be someone who hero worshiped Nite-Wing. And you got to imagine that if superheroes were a real thing, you would have a bunch of wannabes. And the wannabes would be goofballs. So I wanted to write like the ultimate goofball, but also that he would be somewhat of a bad guy. He thinks he's a hero, but he turns out to be a villain. He's racist and abusive, and too quick to temper, and not real smart. He just doesn't get it. And so I just built the character over time. It was because I was given total free reign in Nite-Wing to create whatever I want and build this world and build this cast of characters. And I was given time. The kind of time is very rare in comics because I was way ahead of schedule on all my other books. And so I was able to concentrate only on Nite-Wing for like 3 months. And Scott McDaniel was getting ready to pencil the first issue, and I just sort of started writing Nite-Wing and just didn't stop until I got to issue 12. And then I worked closely with Scott Peterson, terrific editor, one of my favorite editors of all time. And I got to work with him because now we had all 12 issues written, and Scott was just beginning the first issue, to pencil the first issue. And now we were able to go back and play a little bit, move things around, because we had been told to write for the trade, which to me meant you're going to write in 6-issue bites, right? So you may not write one long 6-issue long story, but you want to have subplots that run through 6 issues and are resolved in that 6th issue, so that when the reader buys the trade paperback, they feel they've gotten a complete, satisfying read. Now, you're going to leave dangling plot lines because it's a periodical comic book, but I wanted to leave the readers feeling like they'd read a novel or watched a really good feature film. And so the first year was broken up into 6 main 6-issue, 2 main 6-issue arcs, if that makes any sense, with lots of dangling subplots. But because I was, completely done the first year before really Scott got into the series, Scott McDaniel got into drawing the series, Scott and I were to go back and move things around and massage the story a little bit and make it all seamlessly organic. And that's really the build up to Tad. Tad Ryerstad played a big part in that, as well as the build up and reveals and changes about Dudley Soames. They were at the core of the series and what the series was. But I'm glad you like Tad. He's one of my favorite creations, and I really dug it. And I spoke about Kieran Dwyer earlier. Kieran did his origin. Like, we did a Tad Ryerstad origin issue of Nite-Wing as an inventory issue that eventually got published. And Kieran did just a hell of a job on it. One more thing. Hey, I got a movie coming out. Well, not me, a whole bunch of people, hundreds of people made this movie. I had very little to do with it, except I wrote the novel that it's based on. The movie is called A Working Man. It comes out March 28th, stars Jason Statham and Michael Pena, David Harbour, Jason Fleming, and it's a rock'em sock'em action-packed flick based on my novel Levon's Trade. And I'm hoping it's a big hit, so they make sequels, because I sold them the movie rights to the series, so they can make more of them. And apparently, you people are reacting big to the poster and the trailer. I heard from both MGM and Amazon. They are very, very pleased at the level of the viral level that this material is taken off at. So I would share the numbers with you, but I signed an NDA. But anyway, March 28th, see it with someone you love. Now, if you want to contact me with questions, suggestions, whatever, contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. brunobookstore@gmail.com is the most reliable way to reach me. I check this email address all the time, looking for your fabulous questions, and their questions are fabulous. Thank you to everybody who contributed today, and thank you for liking, listening, watching, however you consume this, and thanks for subscribing and likes and all the rest of it. And I will see, hopefully, all of you down the road.